Greetings, everyone. This is the alternative guy,
And I am the alternative gal.
and we're back here again with another video. This video is going to be really serious and really, it's going to be kind of tough for us to do, but we're going to make a strong attempt to convey some serious information about the subject. And the subject is going to be based on this book here, The Free Negro in Virginia, 1619, 1865. And we have a pamphlet that we're going to share with you too, that we were able to get our hands on. That's going to cover a lot of information. We want to deal with this subject about slavery because I think that we've been totally misled on how slavery existed in Virginia and existed in this country in general. And I want to give a shout out to a couple of brothers that I admire and I respect their work. And that's Dane Calloway and Rod Hayes. And there's other brothers and sisters that are out here doing the work, putting out information about our situation, how this whole thing came about with us being enslaved in America. And we're going to dispel some of the myths about how it happened. We know for a fact that all of us didn't come through the transatlantic slave trade. And we're going to cover a lot of that, but we want you guys to subscribe to our channel because there's no way that we can cover all of this information in this one video. So we're going to share portions of what we want to cover in this video, but we're going to be doing videos in the future. So we want you to subscribe because there's so much information about it. We live in Virginia, and Virginia is a state. It's not the first state that slavery started in, but it has this history in slavery. And the reason why I'm saying it's not the first state, because we know that the Spanish were here and the Portuguese, and slavery took place, going all the way back to Columbus. So, but we're going to cover the Virginia situation. We were born in Virginia, and we know that slavery started. One aspect of slavery started in Virginia, by Virginia being the first colony, first British colony. So that's what we're going to deal with in this video.
But before you get started, I have to ask you. Now, you said that it was going to be hard and difficult to do. Why is it hard and difficult for you? It is not, and I think we need to let the audience know, for me, there is an ease. The only difficulty and hardship that I have is coming before the people because I'm shy. But you have done a lot of research, and we've come across a lot of documents, a lot of books that they wrote and left a trail of information to prove what they did. And for those of us who are our age and a little younger, there is a cliche that states, if you want to keep a people from information and knowledge, put it in a book. They left books. We have documentation. We have receipts to prove that we're not just shooting from the hip. We're not just giving information that's false. So why is it difficult for you?
Well, it's difficult for me because there's so much information out here um, that's in the mainstream. Um, I would say the mainstream narrative. For instance, if we look back on uh, the movie Roots, and it will give you the impression that we all came from through the transatlantic slave trade. So, um, and then you have the other story is that um, about 20 slaves were brought into Williamsburg, and everybody kind of sprung from the start of those 20 slaves being brought here and by the Dutch. So what we have to do is unravel what has been put out here. And like she said, it's been well documented. It's been well documented. And the challenge is unraveling what has been put out and then putting the pieces of the puzzle back together. And the reason why we want to do this is because, see, we know that all of us didn't come through the transatlantic slave trade. But if we accept that narrative, then that narrative would disconnect us from the land. And the whole idea of the British and the Spanish and the French, they wanted this land. That was the whole objective. So if you connect all of us to the transatlantic slave trade, then that means that we don't have any connection to the land.
Right.
And that's what we want. We want our land back.
Right.
We want to be able to clarify the fact that we didn't come, all of us didn't come through slave ships. There might have been some, I'm not going to debate that, but you're still going to have to prove to me how many. So now, what's the next question? What's the next
Okay,
question?
so you're going to begin by talking about the free Negro in Virginia. So my question to you is, and I think you touched on it a bit, but I'm going to ask it again because there are so many other things that we could talk about. What made you want to do this video on such a topic?
Well, I think that it's the main reason is that all melanated people in this country, all over the world, all indigenous people are still struggling with the same thing that we were struggling with hundreds of years ago when our countries were invaded and taken over by the Europeans. So why is it that we are still struggling with the same thing? So that's what made me want to do this video, because we're struggling with the same thing. Nothing has changed. So we know for a fact that melanated people were here before Columbus, thousands and thousands of years before Columbus. So I guess the next question will be, well, who are these melanated people?
Exactly. Who were the free Negroes in Virginia?
Okay, so you have a lot of debate about that.
Mm.
And what we've found in our research is that you had, and we're going to do other videos on based on the research that we've come across. But you even had Moors that were here before Columbus. You had indigenous or Native Americans, however you want to call them. You even had some Sephardic Jews. You had melanated. Uh, some people would say that it was, we were all Hebrews. I mean, there's all kinds of debates about that. But the whole fact of the matter is that there were melanated people that was here before any European got here.
Okay.
And they had systems and they had nations before that.
All right. So just to clarify, and we're going to be using a multitude of vocabulary words that our listeners might not be familiar with, but what are melanated people? Who are the melanated people? And you kind of touched on it, but again, melanation, melanated people, indigenous, aboriginals, who are they?
Well, these people, okay, if you look at the term melanated, you know that you got to have a darker complexion than the European. So if you think about the whole idea about how would slavery even work anyway, if the people that you are enslaving are the same color that you are. So the Europeans considered themselves white. So if the people that they were enslaving were white, then it would be a little bit harder for them to keep track of these people. So it was much easier for Europeans to enslave darker people. So that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with people, and we're going to get into that more later on in the video about how a lot of this happened and how they kept track of it. But so,
how did slavery start in Virginia?
Okay. So here's a tricky question, because a lot of people think that it started, with these, people coming in slave ships, and then they just started enslaving everybody, everybody that was black or melanated. But what happened in 1619, you already had melanated people here. The way it actually started was you had this elite group of people that came here, and they didn't start with just enslaving everybody. you had people coming. No, let me retract. First of all, when the Europeans started coming here, they you had wars. You know, it was friendly at first, and then you had wars, and then you had um, the Europeans, with the guns, and they brought the diseases, and they brought a lot of this, the alcohol and Christianity and all that. So we're going to get into that later. But you had people that came, and you had servants. You had indentured servants. You had some of the natives became indentured servants. Because you're talking about prisoners of war. You're talking about people that had skills and talents that the Europeans wanted to use. But you also had, they brought white servants over here too.
So these were elites who didn't want to do work themselves according to their status in society. They wanted to have people work for them to get things done.
Well, you have to look at the British. You have to look at how the British were. The British felt like they were like the
cream of the crop.
Yeah, they were the upper echelon of the Europeans. They really felt that they were, the upper echelon. So then, but they needed, they saw that they wanted this land.
Okay.
They, coming from Europe didn't have the beautiful landscape that these United States had. So they wanted that. So they needed, people to help them build this country. So they had servants, and then they started bringing their people in, the ones that, they were having problems with in Europe. And so they brought a lot of them over, and they worked as servants too, indentured servants. And you had, like I said, you had the melanated people here, the ones that they had kind of convinced and won battles and everything with them too. So then they started, it didn't start out as slavery.
What was the difference regarding slavery after the 1800s?
Well, yeah, we kind of jumping ahead, but we're going to jump ahead because we want you guys to get a copy of this book and read it because it's thoroughly documented. But before the 1800s, the so-called blacks or the melanated people, they could own, even during the early 1600s, up 1700s, the melanated indentured servers could work their way out of indentured. They could work their way out of
Being indentured.
being indentured, yeah. And some of them had contracts, and usually the contracts might last from 2 to 8 years, and they could work their contract off. And if they did that, then at some point they could actually own an indentured servant. And there's a case that where that did happen. There's several cases that happened, but I know a lot of people haven't heard of Anthony Johnson, who was a melanated individual, and he had indentured servants. And some people say, well, he was the first person to own slaves in America was a black man. But that's he had servants, and then they wound up going to court. They wound up going to court because the person, filed a case in court trying to get himself free because he felt like he was being held longer than his contract was supposed to be. So then, so after when starting in the 1800s, that's when things started changing, because at one time you had people were being there were people that was being they were servants, and then eventually they became slaves. But you had I don't want to jump too far ahead, because in the book it's going to cover how all of this took place.
Okay.
And I don't want to spoil the book. I want you guys to get this book,
Right.
because it's very, and we have other books I'm going to share with you too.
Right.
And here's another book that I'm going to share with you that I want you to read too, that's written by a melanated author. And I want you all to check this book out too. This is the book here.
Next question. What role did the church play in all of this?
Well, the whole idea of the British, they had Christianity, and they felt like this was they had English and they had Christianity, and they felt like, they had the Queen's English and they had the Queen's religion. So when they came with the whole idea of, they knew that if they could get the natives to speak English, and they knew that if they could get them to convert to Christianity, then that was the I would say the psychological and it's really, the reason why I'm struggling with this is because we have so many of our people that have embraced Christianity and religion in general, and not knowing the true history behind these religions. Because if you look at the concepts that they try to spread, and then you see the hypocritical and the contradictions that they're constantly making, how can you enslave somebody and then you say that you are a worshiper of the Creator and Jesus was love and all of this, but at the same time you enslaving another human being. But here's the catch. While all of that was going on, you had other people in other avenues trying to justify all of this, where you had, people that were eugenicists.
Mhm.
You had people that was trying to convince themselves that the Bible justified enslaving other people And most people don't realize that after the Pope declared himself the vicar of God on earth, then he declared that all humans that didn't accept Christianity, they had the right to take whatever they wanted to take from them. And this is in their Christianity. It's even said in the Bible that slaves obey your earthly master as if you were obeying God. I know that passage. I'll put the passage up, to show you the passage that came out of the Bible.
All right. Now let's move on. What was manumission all about?
Okay, so this is where you have where there were some masters that they had, some of them had held servants longer than they should, and then they became enslaved after that. So the whole idea was, they were working towards slavery anyway. But some of the masters, on their deathbed, because they call themselves Christians, so they on their deathbed, they might decide, you know what, I'm gonna go on and free my slave. I'm gonna free them because he wanted to get into heaven. And this is documented that they did this. A lot of them did that. They felt like they wanted to get into heaven. So they freed their slaves. They felt a little guilty about it. Also, you had some of them that they felt that the slaves were deserving of it. They were good slaves, and they wanted to set them free. But there was a catch in Virginia where a lot of the cases they would be, if they set them free, then you had these people saying, well, okay, if you're going to set them free, then where are they going to go after that?
Mhm.
What are they going to do after that? So then they started coming up with these codes where if you free, then you got to be doing something, because see, you got to realize that they had taken the land, and these were Native Americans. These were melanated people that was already here before Europeans got here, but they had taken everything. So they started putting all of these laws and all of these codes in where if you got free, because there was another group, it was always another group that wanted to keep slavery going. But then you had another group that was like feeling guilty, and some of them wanted to free and manumit the slaves. So manumission is basically when an individual slave owner set his slaves free. And so that was the difference between manumission is different from emancipation. And the emancipation came later on.
Okay. So would you like to give summary of your book at this point, or are we going to do it after I talk about the excerpt that I read?
Okay, yeah. So I think we mentioned to you guys that. So I was just briefly going over the book,
Okay.
and I want you guys to get a copy of the book. So my wife is going to go over the pamphlet that we were able to get our hands on. And she's going to explain to you how we ended up with that pamphlet.
Okay, so let me use, see
So,
the pamphlet. And so this pamphlet, and we got a lot of our books and information from the State Library in Richmond. And it's not overwhelming, but it's just enlightening. Anything you want to know about the past, from the land that was bought, deeds on land, marriages, the history of different counties in Virginia, it's all there at the State Library. So as we were doing research on, it started with research on Fort Christiana in Brunswick County, where we grew up. And we've done a video on it, but just to do a little synopsis. So I grew up in Brunswick County. He grew up in Brunswick County. We went to elementary school and high school in Brunswick County. We took government, Virginia history in Brunswick County. And for all those years, we never heard one word about Fort Christiana, which was right down the road from where we grew up and the schools that we were educated in. So that research led us to this pamphlet that talks about the two great evils of Virginia with one common remedy. And this is an excerpt from the delivery that was given by an individual who was part of the Senate in the early 1800s by the name of Edmund Ruffin. And he approached the General Assembly of Virginia with an interest to talk about the two evils in Virginia and how he proposed that these evils would be taken care of. So you got questions for me, right?
yes.
And let me say this before I go forward. These 18 pages were very precise, in depth, and as I answer my questions, it's a must that I keep the precision existing. So as the questions are asked, you'll see me hold my head down because I'm going to not try to ad lib or give my view on it. I'm going to give you specifically what this gentleman said as he approached the General Assembly in Virginia. So
Okay,
let's go.
so before we get to that,
Mhm.
this pamphlet is not available. This, if you go to the library, the only way that you can get a look at this pamphlet is that you're going to have to, they have one copy in the library. They have one copy, and I was able to get my hands on a copy, not from the library.
Okay,
So you know, I'm not saying where I got it from, but I
Okay,
got my
that's-
hands on it,
all right.
not from the library.
all right.
But that is one of a kind, and they have it in on a special floor in the State Library.
And it's a lot of special information that leads you to understand a lot of things. So let's go to questions.
And this brochure, that pamphlet was mailed out to individuals in Virginia during that time. It was in 50?
50, yes.
1850.
Mhm.
Okay, so who was, okay, so we're gonna start, we already know, she's gonna cover who this guy was, but, so what is the two great evils of Virginia and the one common remedy?
All right, so again, this was a proclamation that was presented by Edmund Ruffin in 1850 to the General Assembly of Virginia. That's what this is. He was perturbed to the point that he wanted to take it before a governmental body, a body of law. We need to get something done. So this is what he did. He presented this.
And it was in reference to free Negroes.
All right,
He had a problem with free Negroes
okay,
walking around in Virginia during that time.
okay.
Okay. Right. So who was Edmund Ruffin?
Okay, this guy was a character. So Edmund Ruffin had a plantation called the Melbourne Plantation, and it was located in Hanover County. He was born to a wealthy family who were agriculturists in 1794 in Prince George, right down the road. And he served in the Senate from 1823 to 1827. And guess what? This man was so indebted to his belief in slavery and the Southern way of holding humans against their will that he committed suicide. And we'll get into that. In 1865, he killed himself. And I'll be a little bit more further with that when we go on. So he staunchly advocated for slavery. He fought as a Confederate soldier despite his advanced age. When the war ended in the South and the South was defeated in 1865, he committed suicide rather than submit to the Yankee rule. Right there on the battlefield, rather than succumb to the loss and further give in to what the rule was from the North, he committed suicide. He shot himself. Okay.
Okay, so what was the premise of the delivery that he made to the General Assembly
Okay.
in 1850?
All right.
What was that? What was that all about? What was the premise of it?
Okay. Because of his pro-slavery attitude and the rise in the organized opposition to slavery becoming more powerful, the abolitionists convinced a large number of people in the North that slavery was evil, it was unchristian, it was a system that stained the Declaration of Independence, and it needed to stop. Edmund Ruffin was among the white Southerners who recognized that this movement was a serious threat to the system that they had built that was a benefit to themselves. So that's why he said, no, we're not gonna have that. We gotta make some laws. We gotta make some laws. So that's when he approached the General Assembly with explaining what these two evils were. It's become recognized now. The Northerners want to do away with it. Can't happen. So this is why he presented this proclamation before the General Assembly in 1850.
So so what was the two evils of Virginia.
Okay, so,
But you said, you have
yeah,
two evils.
two evils, that's the name. In all of his, thinking and the goods that he was reaping from the plantation, his two evils were, the first one was a domestic evil. And he felt that this domestic evil was caused by legal policies of manumission,
We talked about that earlier.
all right? And that domestic evil was the free Negroes who had become a nuisance in Virginia at that time.
So why did he say they were a nuisance?
Oh, boy. Well, so he said that they were nuisance because, of course, the slaves were considered to be low-grade beings. They were considered to be ignorant, lazy, criminals. And you talked about earlier when you were giving your delivery, there were some people who were able to, melanated people who were able to not be chastised or chatteled. They had a different responsibility on the plantation. And of course, with those who were chatteled, seeing these people who had different responsibilities, but they maintained the same skin, they were like, okay, so why can't we be that? So the free Negroes were beginning to cause a problem because it influenced the chatteled Negroes to want to break free,
Can
escape.
I just interject? this?
Okay.
Because what happened, this is in the book also. But so you had the free Negro could go on the plantation. Some of them even married some of the other slaves, and they could go back and forth whenever they wanted, when they wanted to. Some of them would hire themselves out to the master, and some of them would even marry some of the slave women. And then the slave women, they couldn't go anywhere, but the husband could go on and off the plantation whenever he wanted to. And he could work for the master if he wanted to. And so some of them was in situations where they didn't, they saw it as a good situation for them because their wives were being taken care of by the master, and he could come and go whenever he wanted to. So you had the free Negro had the status that the slave didn't have. And they felt like he was a problem and he was influencing the slaves because they felt like the slaves at some point was going to want to be free and do the same thing. So that was the reason why they saw it as a nuisance.
All right, so let's get to the second evil. Okay, so the second evil they considered a great foreign evil. And what was that? That was the attempt and partial success of the Northern abolitionists to seduce the slaves to escape because they felt that the institution of slavery was dangerous. It was inhuman. So those were the two evils, the free Negroes and the people outside of Virginia up north who felt that slavery needed to be done away with. Okay.
And also they wanted to influence the surrounding states. Virginia wanted to, influence because they didn't want they wanted the surrounding states to implement the same laws and rules that they had because, the slaves could go across the state borders and, he could get away or he could go and come as he pleased. So they wanted them to have the same restrictions and all that. So a lot of this had to do with, at one point, they wanted to get rid of the free Negroes, but then they saw that they needed workers. So then that was another thing where they needed workers. So it was always like this battle going on with them creating laws and codes and all that.
Right.
And the whole slavery thing was about the free Negro.
Okay.
Okay,
All
I'm
right.
sorry.
Okay. So let's go into the next one.
Okay, so what was said by Edmund Ruffin about free Negroes and slavery?
Okay. So he says, as a class, these people were lazy, ignorant, poor, destitute, careless, and incapable of improving or rising above their very low condition. That's what he said about free Negroes. He said that it might seem heartless and harsh to deduce compensation from a source of human degradation, but we need to make it a law. He said that the institution of slavery in Virginia is a great public and private benefit, and its integrity should be maintained. He said, these people are naturally inferior of intellect and capable of self-government and guiding themselves and being guided by others. And it's the proper and normal condition for these people to be most useful and happy to the white man, for the white man. He said that emancipation, well, manumission in this case, because not emancipation hadn't taken place yet. So he's saying that the ability to free the slaves has been injurious to themselves, to their descendants, morals, contentment of happiness, and to those who wish to be slaves, and to be the interest of the white man, and to the detriment of people at large. So he saw these people as just low down, inhuman beings. And this is what he presented to the General Assembly in
These
1850.
were the newly elected members of the
Right,
General Assembly.
exactly. So he was fighting to get laws passed. And I don't want to skip ahead.
Okay, well, that's basically, so how did Virginia rank in the 1850s?
Okay, so this is how they ranked. In the 18...
Okay, so do you want to deal with?
Well, I kind of wanted to go here, what were the concerns presented to the General Assembly? So, and I touched on it a bit.
Okay.
But, so, there were laws that were made to strengthen how the Southerners felt about this institution. And in his presentation, he said that we have to have a way where these individuals receive certificates if they were found to be capable, if they were found to be able to work, if they were found to be able to follow instructions, and if they were not criminals, they were issued certificates. Anybody who was not issued a certificate, he says they should be branded and beaten. The only thing they should be given to eat was water and bread. He said that all states outside of Virginia should be forbidden to take any slaves if they wanted to seek asylum in their state. And he said that all counties, cities in Virginia who wanted to accept the slaves who were not given a certificate, they could not be able to do that. They were forbidden. So the laws that they established in 1850 were the laws that prevailed.
They had that freedom of movement.
Right.
And if they didn't want to work, they didn't work.
Okay.
And if they wanted to hire themselves out, they would do that. But keep in mind that you're talking about people that land has been stolen. You take somebody's land and you want them to be the way you want them to be for the benefit of you. You know, but then you start making all of these laws and
Right.
rules to make it seem like they're worse
Yeah.
than you. But look at what you've done. You've taken everything that he had. I don't think the Europeans realized that these people were existing before you got here. And you came to them. They didn't come to you.
So as a result of the numbers of the census, and let me go over that again. In 1850, the census, 434,495 whites, 236,167 slaveholders, 198,328 non-slaveholders, and 54,388 were free Negroes. And as a result of that census, Virginia became the free Negro state. So
And that's why you thought it was a problem. Too many free Negroes.
that's why he thought it was a problem. And that's why he wanted laws to be implemented so that there would be a level of control for those who prove themselves to be worthy of the certificate and for those who were not eligible to receive a certificate. He wanted Virginia to pass laws to further their control.
Okay. So there you have it. We're gonna summarize now because we have many more videos that we want to do on the subject. But
So
what
let me summarize. Let me just summarize because it's fresh on my mind.
okay.
And you know what? So when you read all of this information, it makes you feel that you have to do something. It really does. And it gives you, anyway, let me just summarize. History is written by the victor. He'll give you a view of history that makes you less resistant of his rule. When you allow another people to become the determiner of your history and experience, they determine your consciousness. The truth can never be told. It can only be realized. I've realized the truth. I've realized that for us to still be witnessing the same thing that our forefathers witnessed over 2 centuries ago, it was all implemented through laws. And this is another thing that Ruffin ended with. It was law and an operation of civilized life that the lowest, improvident, and suffering class be decreased by death over birth, the lowest class thus witnessing extinction. So this is how he felt. They needed to become extinct. Laws by way of laws, and it was better for them to be decreased by death than birth. And I realized this is still existing. In this day, 2022, there is an effort to cause those of melanation to be extinct. And we better open our eyes and pay attention and realize the truth of what took place. Thank you.
Okay, so what I would like to say in summary is that we have to realize that these laws is what got us in these situations. And we can see that politicians, religious leaders, all of these people existed back in the day. And we've marched and we've done all kinds of things that to try to free ourselves up from the oppression. But I think that once we realize that there are people that are determined to keep us enslaved, and not only just us, but anybody that want to go against the official narrative,
Yeah.
Because back then you had 4 Europeans and you had 4 melanated people, and then you had intelligent melanated people, and you had so-called intelligent Europeans. But the problem is, if you don't have a group of people that realize that this earth don't belong to anybody, and we have to realize that the Europeans were the ones that came up with private ownership. You know, this is mine. And we have to look at the native cultures and realize that they knew that they couldn't sell land or they couldn't own land because you can't pick up land and take it with you. But you could pick up uh, a book, or you can pick up, uh, pottery or something. You could take it with you because you made it, and you could take it with you and you could sell it. But how can you sell land, something that don't even belong to you? You didn't create land. You didn't create a lake, but yet still you can tell me whether I can fish on this lake or not. So these are the things that we gotta realize. We gotta try to understand who has been controlling all of this and who needs to control it. The people that need to control this earth should be people that have the best interest for everybody. So we're gonna go, our next video, we're gonna talk about some other ways that this situation developed for us and to our disadvantage. And we're gonna cover this guy, Walter Plecker. You know, he was a character because we know that all of the Native American, Indian, all of the history of how they stole this land from us, all of that was wiped out by him.
Oh, yeah.
And so we're going to cover a lot of information. So we want you to subscribe to our channel and support our efforts, because we're going to be doing a lot more research, and we will appreciate you guys for watching and taking the time out to watch, and feel free to leave your comments and your suggestions.
Right.
You can support us
Right.
on this channel, and we have a Patreon channel, Patreon page. So until we meet again, peace.
Peace and love and wealth.